Hello everyone, welcome to the Justifying with Evidence video. What we are going to talk about in this video is how to write the perfect justification response by incorporating the evidence that's provided. Now you're going to see the evidence in questions provided as either descriptions, as observations, or as tables of data. And what you're going to have to do is use this evidence to make connections or draw conclusions based on the specific prompt in each question. Now, although you have some evidence or some description, observation, or data given to you, in order to answer the question sufficiently, you're still going to need to combine some of your basic knowledge of the principles of chemistry. So, in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present you with 3 example questions. I'm going to show you the question, and then I'm going to have you pause the video, think about how you would answer that question, and then I will show you my answer, and we'll kind of talk about some of the positives in my answer, and then you can kind of use that to compare with what you said. So let's read the first question. The temperature of 2 samples of aqueous hydrochloric acid are measured. Sample 1 has a temperature of 75 degrees Celsius, while sample 2 has a temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. Which of the 2 samples has a higher average kinetic energy? Justify your answer using the data provided. So let's just talk about what we see here. First of all, the data that's provided is the temperature of the 2 samples. So sample 1 has a temperature of 75, sample 2 has a temperature of 35. The connection that you're going to be required to make is between how temperature is related to average kinetic energy. So that's kind of the basic principle of chemistry that you would need to apply here. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video at this point, think about how you would answer this question, and then you can press play, and I'm going to go over mine right now. So pause. Okay, welcome back. So here's what I said. Really not as hard as it seems. Sample 1 has a higher average kinetic energy because it has a higher temperature than sample 2. So first thing to point out is how I made my connection between average kinetic energy and temperature. So I had to know that if you have a higher temperature, you have a higher average kinetic energy. That's what we had to kind of make the connection between chemistry and the question. I justified that by stating that sample 1 has a higher temperature than sample 2. Let's say you had just answered by saying that sample 1 has a higher average kinetic energy. If you had not included the evidence given saying that it has a higher temperature and that was your kind of because statement, unfortunately you would not have gotten credit for this. So part 2 questions in AP Chem are worth 1 point. No partial credit is given. If the question asks you to justify your answer and you don't get any credit, regardless of whether or not you said that sample 1 had the higher energy. Let's move on to our second example. This one I've got a table of evidence. So the question is, 2 unknown samples are discovered and 3 properties of these substances are tested. Determine which of the 2 substances is the nonmetal. Justify using the evidence in the chart. So let's look at our evidence. We have hardness, luster, and melting point. Unknown sample 1 is hard, is shiny, and has a high melting point. Unknown sample 2 is soft, dull, with a low melting point. You're going to have to figure out which of those sets of evidence describes a nonmetal, and then you're going to justify your response once you make that connection. So pause the video here, think about your answer. Welcome back. Here's my answer. So unknown 2 is the nonmetal because it is soft, dull. It is a soft, dull solid with a low melting point. Again, if I had just said unknown 2 is the nonmetal, that honestly, you had a 50-50 shot. That could have just been a shot in the dark. You don't know that, or sorry, your AP test grader would not know that you genuinely knew that soft, dull solids with low melting points were nonmetals. So you have to be able to use that evidence. Let's look at our last example. The question says the equilibrium constant K of a reaction is greater than 1. Determine whether the products or reactants are present in a higher concentration at equilibrium. Justify your response using the provided equilibrium data. Doesn't really look like we have a lot of data here, does it? But the value of K, stating that the constant has a value greater than 1, is pretty important here. So pause the video, think about how that value relates to the concentration of products or reactants at equilibrium, and then think of how you'd word your response. Welcome back. Here's my answer. The products are present in a higher concentration because the equilibrium constant is greater than 1, which describes a reaction that favors the reactants. So I can see that I have a typo. It should say favors the products. But biggest thing here, guys, is that you, A, identified that the products would be higher. You are pulling in the given information that the constant value is greater than 1. And then, so as my description should say, the reaction favors the products. So you're making that connection between the value of the equilibrium constant and your knowledge of whether products or reactants are present higher at equilibrium. So that was our video about justifying. Hopefully you can see how you need to pull in the data when you write these justification responses. If you just say the answer, that's not enough. You have to back it up given the data that you have in the question. Good luck, guys.